There was a Sunday school teacher who was teaching the 10 Commandments to her 5 and 6 year olds, so kind of get that image of how that age. And she's gone through and she's explaining the 10 Commandments, and she gets to honor thy father and mother. So she asks the class, is there a commandment that teaches us how to treat our brothers and sisters? And one little boy shouted out, thou shalt not kill. So, you know, we know from last week that whining, complaining kills joy. It's a joy killer. So last week in the first part of this little mini-series I'm doing on Whiners and Winners, we looked at the story of Martha and that little bit of a whining episode that she had. And then we also talked about Jesus' response to her, that whining and complaining is really not the better portion. It wasn't for her, and that extrapolates out to us today. In fact, there's only futility, Jesus would say, in worried whining. So, and you remember kind of the point of last week's message for some that weren't here was that Martha was distracted by all those many tasks that she had, and it was causing her to complain. She complained to Mary and to Jesus. And both moves, it's kind of the point of last week, both moves were in the wrong direction. Both moves didn't really give her what she really needed. So, and then we talked about the effects of too much complaining. Associating too much with complainers actually physically hurts our brains. And then we closed with the good news that Jesus' words can turn whiners into joyful winners. So it took me 18 minutes to say that last week, and I just did it in 2. So how do you like that? 2 minutes, 2-minute sermon. So, the closing line that I went fishing trying to see if I could catch you to come back this week was, how do we get started doing that? It's one thing to say, this is the truth, this is how it works, this is the effect it has on our brain. Now, what do we do? What do we do about it? Well, the answer is that we tell the truth in love. So if you would turn to Ephesians chapter 4, I'm going to be reading a quite famous verse, 4:15, and I'm going to skip down to 25 through 29, beginning with 4:15. But speaking the truth in love, we must grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ. Now down to 25. So then, by putting away falsehood, let us all speak the truth to our neighbors, for we are members of one another. Be angry, but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and do not make room for the devil. Thieves must give up stealing rather than let them labor. Let them work honestly with their own hands, so as to have something to share with the needy. Let no evil talk come out of your mouths, but only what is useful for building up, as there is a need, so that your words may give grace to those who hear it. May God bless the reading and the hearing of God's holy word. I remember many years ago, right here in this church, I was asked to do a little bit of a mediation. You know, some folks were in conflict, and they said, they asked if I would act as kind of the mediator in this conflict. And I could tell immediately as I got in, I was listening to each other's story and trying to get them to hear each other. And I could tell immediately one of the parties in conflict was basing their argument on this verse 15 right here out of Ephesians, telling the truth in love. And it goes on, not to love or. Well, let me get back to that a second. So in the midst of the conflict, I'm recognizing what's going on. That one of these folks was using this verse. It was not a member of this church, but they were using this verse as a means to not love, as a means not to show grace, as a means not to get healing, but really, they use this verse as a way to wound the other person, to hurt them, to get their way. And it was so hard for me to watch that happen, because if we identify ourselves as Christians and as disciples of Jesus Christ, we have no business kind of like that pinata. We have no business using Scripture as a basis to beat somebody up, to hurt them, to get our pound of the flesh, even if we feel like we're really justified in doing so. So, back to last week. If whining is not the better portion, and there's no whining, I said last week, in the kingdom of heaven, then what do we do? What do you do when you have a beef with somebody or when you need to voice concern? Do we just kind of suck it up? Say, thank you very much? When the emotions want our mouth to do something a little bit tougher, trying to get the record straight. I remember I got pulled over for a ticket one time, and it was a completely bad deal. Lisa knows the story. I'm not going to go into it, but I was so upset because what I got the ticket for, I was not doing. So, and if I think about this verse and I think back to that ticket, I guess we might, one way to approach this is say, I should have said, thank you so much, officer, for that lovely ticket. That was the most exceptional ticket experience I've ever had. And now I'm going to go tell 8 to 16 friends all about that experience and how wonderful it was. Thank you so much for the fine. And I especially like the driving school. Now, you're probably not going to do that, and that would be kind of silly to suggest. But I did read a story about a woman. At the end of service, I go out there and I shake your hands. And lots of you have lots of nice things, almost always complimentary things to say to me when you're going out the door. So I read a story about a pastor, same experience. People are leaving worship, and so this one woman, found her way through the line, went up, shook the pastor's hand, and said, thank you so much. I found your message today so helpful. To which the pastor, replying back, well, I hope it didn't prove as helpful as the last sermon you heard me preach. And the woman was kind of taken back, and she said, well, what do you mean? Well, the minister said, that sermon lasted you 3 months. She hadn't been in church for a long time. Now, he may have been speaking the truth to that woman going out the door, but the love was a little hard to find, wasn't it? To speak the truth, it's a summons for us. If we're gonna stand on our faith and stand on our belief in God and identify ourselves as Christians, it's a summons to righteous, right-acting behavior that's in line with God. And that kind of summons to righteousness is found throughout the Old and the New Testament. But truth, listen to this, truth couched in complaining and continued whining is very far away from those biblical references and often misused commandments such as this in verse 15, to speak truth in love. And if you want to remember anything today, I like little mnemonic devices to remember a point. So here it is. Wine and love make for a terrible drink. I'm talking about whining. Wine and love, it's just not a good mixture. So that's why I wanted us to look at Ephesians today, especially verse 29. I want to read it to you again. It said, let no evil talk come out of your mouth, but only what is useful for building up as there is need, so that the words may give grace, your words giving grace to those who hear. Now, one writer was commenting on this very passage, and he said the goal of building up the body of Christ is to attain unity of our faith and the knowledge of the Son of God. So building begins with equippers. He's talking about you and I, who are all agents of truth. Again, he's talking about you and I, agents of truth, and the aim of the building is unified knowledge. That is a unified grasp of truth. Well, that sounds lovely, and I agree with it. Theologically, it makes sense. But you might be going, what did that mean, and what is the truth? What is truth? Well, I could give you that answer in one quick line. Jesus said in John chapter 13:34, I give you a new commandment. I think, is Brett here? I think you used this when you preached. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another just as I've loved you. You also should love one another. That's the truth. How we speak, it makes a big difference. When the church began, think about this. If you go back and look at Acts, its growth was unprecedented. And the reason that people said the church was growing so quickly and affecting so many folks, and if you can go back and you read Acts, it'll say it was because of how these new Christians loved one another. They could be seen in their love and they could be heard. People heard what they said. It was amazing. It was so new. It was so different. Because how we communicate to one another is a great determiner of our relationships. It's also a barometer. If you want to gauge anything, it's a barometer of the effectiveness of our relationships. Whining winnows our lives. It winnows away our joy. It winnows away our relationships. However, compassionate conversations can cure brokenness and disunity. Let me tell you, folks, if we need anything in our country today, it's a cure for brokenness and disunity. So Paul's encouraging the church. He's encouraging the church in this practice of speaking the truth in love. And this kind of love can be demonstrated without belittling or beating up people that we disagree with. Wow, I wish we could get that through to not only the Christian community, but the whole of the community. So what do you do if you have a problem? I got a problem. What do I do? Remember the guy I quoted last week? His name was Guy Winch, the PhD, and he wrote that book called The Squeaky Wheel. I referenced him a couple of times in what he had to say. I thought it was good words. But he says, complaining the right way, it may not only create a solution, it can curb that anxiety that hurts our brains, that peels away the neurons in our brains and gives us that feeling of stress. So I wanted to spend today giving you something very practical to walk away with, because I left you hanging with the problem last week, but I didn't exactly delve deeply into the solution. So I want to offer you his 7 tips for healthy relationships, way to communicate, a way to tell the truth in love. So they're going to go quick. So here we go. And I think you're going to see them flash up on the screens. Number 1, our complaints should have a health purpose. A health purpose. Before we go out and start sharing all our woes, we should kind of know what we want, have a goal in mind. He says, don't voice your dissatisfaction until you're clear about what you're upset about and what you want. Man, so many times, sometimes I'll launch into something, I'm not even clear about what I want. It's just coming out. He says identifying a purpose is the most important if you have a complaint of some kind, especially if you're going to do it with a spouse or a friend or a colleague, because he says those are the folks we spend the least time thinking about what we want. We're really complaining a lot, but we're not really putting a lot of thought into it. And there's 2 advantages to that. The first, it calms down our emotions. We have to think through it. And then the second is it makes the other person able to help you. Because you know what? If I don't know what I want, how can I get you to help me with it? It's true for you. If you don't know what you want in the relationship, how can you get others to get on board and help you if you can't even get clear about it? 2, start and end with a positive statement. I thought this was kind of unique. But before we launch into a problem, he says, set that stage for a positive outcome. He says a complaint is an accusation, basically. When we come up to somebody, we're pointing a finger, we're usually accusing them in some way of something, and it's hard. It's hard for folks not to get defensive if you're feeling kind of attacked in that way. So he says, hey, put your thoughts together in a way that motivates the other person to actually want to help you. He said a positive statement is likely to help them do that. It's interesting in Young Life, we always teach our camp counselors, our leaders, a style of relating with kids, and it works with adults too. But there's 2 ways we point that out. One is the type of person that's the oh no leader. The oh no leader, whatever happens, oh no, not eggs again. Oh no, not this again. Oh, another speaker. Oh no. Instead, they say, be the oh boy leader. Those are the best green eggs I've ever had. I can remember at table sometime the bacon was burned or something. Man, this crispy bacon's wonderful. This is the greatest bacon. You can only get this bacon at Windy Gap up at the camp. So it's the, oh boy, it's the best ever. And it's amazing how contagious that is and how much more willing people are to receive. He says, finish your complaint on a high note too. He says, wrap your complaint in a what do you call it? A complaint sandwich. And the 2 pieces of bread in the complaint sandwiches are positive statements beginning. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Nobody likes a bitter Christian. Really, there should not be such a thing. But we're human. If you look at the Psalms, it was so interesting. This guy, he's not a Christian. I don't know if he's a Christian. He doesn't declare his faith. But I thought his points were well made. But if you listen to what he said about that complaint sandwich, go back and read the Psalms. Almost every Psalm you'll read is a complaint sandwich. It starts out, God, you're so wonderful. The middle part is, why did you let us, look what's happened to us. You're killing me, God, you're killing me. And then it comes at the end, God, you're so wonderful. You always come to the aid. It's a complaint sandwich. So it's interesting he followed that pattern out. I don't know if he's a person of faith. 3, deliver a lean complaint. I would have the most difficulty with this. My wife would tell you my words are generally very lean. They're very drawn. Of course, you know that too. They're very drawn out. So he says if the problem's been going on for a while, don't go into every single detail. Instead, talk about the most recent incident and stick to the facts as much as possible, holding back on those sort of bitter emotions. 4, consider your listener and your emotions. He says basically good complaints are a request for help. We're not set out to beat somebody up. We're trying to get some help. And he said that can be really, really tricky, that we need to think about who it is that we're speaking to. And sometimes who we're speaking to is the person that's annoyed with us the most. Sometimes we speak to God. We need to consider the listener and our emotions. I started the message earlier with the talk about the 2 people that I did the mediation for. And I think it comes under this number 4, consider your listener and your emotions. When we're allowed to share the truth in love, it's not open season to vent all your personal issues you've ever had since you were born. I can hear them now. My mother didn't breastfeed me, or I was the middle child, and my parents didn't get me a cell phone. My friends had them at 10 years old, and I don't have one. You can go back and back and back. All that stuff we bring into our relationships. Here's my chance I can launch. Consider your listener and your emotions. Number 6, use social media properly. This is kind of interesting. He says taking complaints to social media it's really a double-edged sword. Yeah, we can get some words out there, but it can quickly come into a space for venting bitterness. And, I see some of that stuff come across the internet. It's amazing the bitterness out there. And because it's so easy, isn't it? It's an impersonal way to vent. I doubt many of us would get face to face with somebody and say some of the things that I see said on social media. It's a great danger today. We need to think what we're saying. Number 7, the last one, almost done. Let it go. Is that number 6? I left out a number. You're lucky you. There's only 6 of them. You're going to get out earlier. Wow, that was the best message ever. The last one, whatever number it is let it go. And don't sing the song. Kara said, as soon as you put that up there, they're all going to think of the movie. Okay. But it's true, let it go. Whatever the outcome, be prepared to let it go instead of dwelling on it. Now, this is common sense. We know it, but man, is it hard to do. Minor irritations can cost us. We learned that last week. It costs our mental health. So Winch, the guy who came up with these points, which now there are 6 of them, He was trying to be lean. Which one was that? That was number two, number three. Okay, so getting back to this. We need to practice emotional hygiene. I thought that was an interesting phrase, emotional hygiene. Get rid of the habits that are bad for us. And if we choose one thing, he says, and just obsess over and over and over it, it'll just make us even more upset. And we end up feeling victimized. But he says, when you practice these 6 items properly, and I think Jesus would say the same thing, you'll feel more empowered. Speaking the truth in love can increase our self-esteem. If we're doing it right, if we're doing it the way Jesus wants us to do it, it wouldn't make us feel bad, would it? It would actually increase our self-esteem. So Christian unity, I don't need to say how important this is for us. People look at us. They look at how we live, how we love, what we say. And they judge the Christian faith on our behavior. And that's a scary thing. But Christian unity begins and ends with how we conduct our relationships. Just like the early church, it was how they loved. People say, how are those folks at Markham Woods? How are they in their relationships? How are they loving each other? You know, I would make the case, and it's not the sermon today, but I'm gonna say this. Maybe one day we'll talk more about it. I'm gonna make the case that how we conduct our relationships as Christians is the most powerful mechanism that Jesus describes in the whole New Testament. I think it's more powerful than miracles. They didn't say lots of people came to the church because of all the wonderful miracles. I don't think it's prophecy. They didn't say, oh, this early church has these wonderful prophecy about the kingdom coming. It wasn't that. No one talked about that part of it. If you read Acts, what they talked about are the relationships of believers, the people of the way, the followers of Jesus Christ. It was the power of godly relationships that made the most difference of anything. Now, I told you my story of woe last week about how we had to come home quick from North Carolina because a giant tree had fallen and broke off 3 or 4 other trees, took out the power lines. It was a mess. And so we had the tree guys come in, and the tree was so large that they had to, that's how I felt, that one picture up there. The tree was so large that they had to bring in this giant crane, right? So if you've heard me talk about my yard, and some of you have seen my house, you know, I like my yard. I've taken good care of it. And my lawn is always trimmed really nice. And, you know, I've got Elisa now where she knows how to do the different angles and make it look, you know, she was helping me the other day. I didn't even have to tell her, you know. So, you know what it looks like after heavy machinery goes up and down for 2 days in your yard? You know how you get those giant ruts? And it's, oh man, it was terrible. Half the grass is dead, but that was last week. We're moving on, not complaining, just moving on. I'm just describing it to you. So you know, it looked bad. You know, they were all done, the machinery was all gone, and I just gotta look out there and get kind of grieve over my yard. And so our AC also broke. I'd left that one out last week. So we called the AC guy. And so the AC guy pulls up in this big old truck, and you know what he does? Drives in the grass. I have sprinklers along the edge, and so, God, I looked at that, and it was like, just like I said before about bringing all your stuff into the conversation, and I was so upset over that whole tree thing in the yard, and I didn't launch on the guy, but it's unlike me to go up and complain, but I did. I went up to the guy, I said, hey man, you're parking on me. It was raining. You know how the grass gets soggy when it rains? And he had trenched it out, you know. I got new trenches. I can plant corn now. I got trenches in my front yard. So, focus, Joe, focus. So, and I go to the guy, I said, man, you're parking in my car. I got sprinklers out there. And he goes, oh, I'm so sorry. He's so apologetic. I'm so sorry. Oh gosh. And I said, yeah, man, now I got big old trenches out there. And so the guy came in, very nice guy, by the way, and he's working on the AC. And I began to think about what I said to y'all last week. You know? The preacher has to listen to his own words sometimes. So I'm sitting there, and it's starting to weigh on my heart. And I started feeling terrible. And so I went back to that guy, and I said, man, I just got to tell you, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You know, I didn't mean to jump on you like that. And you know what? Then I started to get some joy back. You know, I started to become the person I wanted to be. rather than being the complainer. So the difference between a whiner and a winner is how we conduct our relationships with one another, even in this community here, especially how we communicate our faith and our attitude-driven speech makes all the difference in the world. Jesus says, speak love, not whine. And that's WHINE.